Hi, welcome to Awkwardly Awesome. My name's Regan, and I'd like to talk to you today about just a few things that I've had to deal with in my life. Awkwardly Awesome is about owning what you do, even when it's not cool. Growing through it, personal development, all those sorts of things. And I'd like to have some guests on eventually, but for now, I'm just doing the show solo. Today I'd like to talk about common sense. This is something that I've always been a bit of a dreamer, uh, unorthodox, somebody who looks for a better way to do things than what we're doing at the time. When I worked at McDonald's, I came up with the idea that we should move the drink fountains out from behind the counter so that we could serve twice as many customers during a lunch hour as we could at that time. I was told, Regan, the customers will never pour their own drinks. But now everybody does it, and it's the most natural thing in the world, and they're able to handle twice as many customers in a lunch rush. Now, every single day over the entire chain of McDonald's, that's literally $1 billion idea, and that went straight to the shareholders. I never saw a cent of it, and because my supervisor just didn't even take it to the next level. She just shot the idea down right where it was, and that was that. Another idea I had was get rid of the penny. In Canada, we've gotten rid of the penny. Everybody just rounds to the nearest nickel, and they say, that's good enough. We don't have to be spending all that extra money and time making and counting pennies, which actually cost more due to inflation than the coin value actually is. Charging money for plastic bags was something I came up with. I said, get the customer a better plastic bag and charge them 5 cents for it. You can never do that. People won't do it. People will get angry. Now it's the most common thing ever. You go to the grocery store, the girl asks you how many bags you want. She charges you a nickel for each one, and you go on your way, and nobody really complains about it at all. None of these things were common sense. I mean, maybe they were common sense. Maybe they were uncommon sense. It could be either way. So, I'm going to try to not read from my notes too much, but I got notes to keep me on track, and I hope it doesn't make too much of a distraction having me read from them from time to time. Napoleon Bonaparte once said that common sense isn't very common anymore. That was 200 years ago. If it wasn't very common 200 years ago, when everyone kind of had to live according to the same standards, whether you were a king or a peasant, and your chamber pot might be gilt with some gems studding it, rather than a bucket that you use during the night and then throw out into the middle of the street. Everyone was kind of doing the same thing. For it to be common sense, well, what is common sense? It seems to me that common sense is the knowledge that everybody has, right? It's not something that is limited to a small body of people. It's not specialized knowledge, right? And in this age that we have of specialists, where everybody goes into a specialist occupation or studies, it kind of seems that common sense has fallen by the wayside. Common sense used to be collecting eggs from a chicken, drawing water from a well, carrying the water home if you didn't have it piped to your home. And most people didn't. It's piped water into our homes. One of my friends, I think it was Russell, once told me that a single bedroom apartment has more luxury in it than any king's palace in history. And when you think about that, it's true. Hot and running cold water, a kitchen where you can just throw food in the microwave and have it done a minute and a half later. Indoor plumbing where the sanitation takes everything away for you and provides you with clean, fresh water so that you can wash more times in a day than you need to. Just so many things that we take for granted. We say, oh, look, it's got a radiator heater that clunks when it when the people upstairs use it or whatever. But the truth is that's a more effective heater than a wall-size fireplace, because a wall-size fireplace shoots 80% of the heat straight up the chimney and nobody gets to use it. Also, you have to constantly feed a fire. Like I live off-grid and I burn wood exclusively for my heat. And during the coldest months of winter, you only get sleep in 2-3 hour snatches because you have to wake up and fill the stove again. We just went through minus 40 degree weather, and minus 40 is minus 40. It's the same for both Celsius and Fahrenheit. So if you ever hear me referencing minus 40, it's just minus 40. There's no conversion necessary. But during those times, you know, I'd sleep for about an hour, hour and a half, and then have to get up and load the stove. And you're keeping such a fierce fire going that you almost burn yourself every time you open the door. There's this huge bed of coals, but it's not putting out enough heat to properly warm your house. So you're having to constantly feed wood into this thing. And you need to let it burn down enough so that you can get enough wood into it to actually give you enough heat. So there's a lot, and those were things that were common sense. Poking at your fire was common sense. Carrying a shuttle of coal, or a coal scuttle, I can't even remember, I think it was a coal scuttle. Carrying a coal scuttle without getting coal dust all over yourself. That was common sense. These are the things now are common sense, is turning up the thermostat. Letting the water run for a few seconds before you drink it so that you get the warm water out of the pipes. These are what we have for common sense now. It seems to be that common sense is used more often as an insult than it's used for any kind of praise. You know, people will say they just don't have any common sense. Common sense isn't very common anymore. They echo Napoleon Bonaparte. Most people don't even know anything about Napoleon Bonaparte, but they know that saying. You know, Napoleon Bonaparte, probably saying his name too many times, but he introduced standardized military equipment to his armies. Everybody's gun shot the same size of ball. And before that, everybody kind of had to bring their own bullet molds and make their own bullets in between battles. And there was a bunch of prep work that each individual soldier had to do. Whereas Napoleon just said, okay, well, let's set up one ammunition factory, or several, however many we need, but we'll set them up and they're all using the same equipment. It seems like just a no-brainer to us now, but that, and he called it common sense, but I think what he was actually using was uncommon good sense. Is there a body of knowledge out there that everyone knows? Or is it just an excuse for the average individual to insult the dreamers and those who would question the status quo? Even the word status quo, most people don't know what it means. Status quo means that which was before, the way it was. And, you know, I mean, the way it was 100 years ago, even just 100 years ago, people were using horses extensively. My grandpa tells about when he got the first tractor, and he was so happy that he didn't have to use horses anymore. Well, he told, my grandpa's no longer with us, but he used to tell that story of how when they got a tractor, that was the happiest day of his life, because you didn't have to go out and catch the horses, which used to be common sense. You didn't have to harness them every single day. You went out, you fired up the tractor, you let it warm up a little bit, and off you went. You bought fuel, which was dirt cheap in those days, rather than having to go out and cut feed for your horses all summer long. All of those things were common sense. Most people can't even hold a scythe properly anymore, let alone go out and cut enough feed for a horse to eat. When we insult the dreamers, we insult the future. Because even with this phone that I'm using to shoot this, you know, like, by the way, I understand Russell mentioned to me that my format, the tall format here of my video is distracting, and people who are watching on a laptop, you know, they just see this skinny little tiny picture in the middle of the screen. This is a result of my tripod, which is a bucket upside down with a roll of tape holding my phone upright. I don't trust leaving the phone sideways on the bucket to get a wider angle shot, so sadly this is what we're stuck with for now until I can come up with something better. I watched a podcast where the guy said, people can just shoot a video on their phone and that'll be good enough. And that's where I realized that, hey, I've got a phone and I can make it stand without me holding it. I don't want to have to hang on to it and shoot myself in selfie mode all the time. But yeah, so I did it this way. And until I get better equipment, we're kind of stuck with this format. But I would like to improve my setup. How is everyone different from they? As a member of the truth community, we often talk about they want us to do this and they want us to do that. And the most common thing that we hear back is, well, who's they? And people usually want the conversation to end there. That's how they politely tell us to shut up, because they want us to define they. And then as soon as we say, well, who they is in this case, then the person that we're speaking with will be like, no, that's not what happens. Like, I place a lot of the blame for they on international bankers, insurers. Insurance companies run most of things. If you have to insure something, your insurance company is calling the shots on how you can use it. That's why we have to wear seatbelts. It's not to protect the police officers who have to dig people out. It's not to protect you. It's to protect your insurance company. Your insurance company is the one who actually has to pay out when you get a more severe injury. And as such, it's to protect them. That's, we didn't put millions of dollars forth lobbying for these laws. We supported them when people came up and said, hey, it's a good idea. And it is a good idea to wear your seatbelt. If you're driving 5,000 pounds of steel down the road and you should strap yourself into it. I know a guy who stole a vehicle, I think, or maybe he took his dad's vehicle, technically stole it, cruised down the road, picked up his friends, they had a bunch of drinks, he drove further down the road, went off the road into the ditch, rolled the truck, and as he was rolling, he flopped out the window, and then the truck rolled onto him. If he'd been wearing a seatbelt, that wouldn't have happened. So it is, that's common sense, or uncommon good sense, to strap yourself into the dangerous rolling steel cage that we cruise around in. Is common sense ever used as a compliment? If somebody told you that your idea was particularly common, would you feel good about that? I don't really think so. It seems to me that, being told, that's like another way of being called basic. Yeah, what a basic idea. What a common idea. Hey, that's something that anybody could have come up with. We don't want our ideas to be common. We want them to be uncommon. Uncommon good sense would seem to be a better attribute to cultivate in our lives than common sense. Common sense just kind of seems to be bland. I've heard of a character in a children's book who had uncommon good sense. And she was the hero. I think she was a mouse, right? It was a children's book. Everything was personified as in different aspects, but she knew what was going on, and she knew how to deal with the problems that came up, because she would just look at it and she would come up with an excellent solution for it. That's not common. Maybe I should write some stories to bring that idea more to the forefront, because I can kind of write a bit, I think if I was to write out notes and based on that, I'd probably do a lot better than the rabbit trails I tend to go off on. But sometimes those rabbit trails lead interesting places. Common sense seems to be the C- of knowledge. You guys might hear me rip on C- regularly, but that's because C- is a passing grade. But no one who strives for excellence ever tries for a C-. You want the A. You want the A+. And A+ isn't even necessarily a thing. It just means you're the teacher's pet. You get an A-, it means that maybe you're difficult, maybe you ask the hard questions, maybe you're awkwardly awesome. Those are the kind of people that I'd like to interview on here, is the people that, got an A- because they were difficult in class. The people who got a C- because they really weren't good at it, but they got the passing grade just for the effort they put in. I don't have anything against a C-. I know lots of people I even know people who strived for a C-. But that's the guy who sits halfway in his lawn chair, drunk in his front yard while his children play around him now. So he's not exactly someone that you want to strive to be for either. conformity is not really how we advance. You know, conformity is what people are talking about when they want your C minus. You know, C minus, yeah, I'm going to leave C minus alone, but conformity, let's rip on that for a bit. Conformity is where you just try to be like the guy beside you, right? You give up your individual identity in order to be like the person next to you so that they don't criticize you. It's the old crab in the bucket scenario where the crab tries to get out of the bucket and everyone else around him pulls them back down. Some crabs are stronger than others and actually sometimes even manage to get out of the bucket, you know. Everyone knew that if God wanted man to fly, he'd have given them wings. You know, everyone knew this. This was an established fact. After Otto Lilienthal crashed his glider and died, no one had any doubt whatsoever about it. Like, absolutely. Stay on the ground. Stay where it's safe. Only a fool would try to fly. It was common sense. For anyone that's ever traveled by air, though, the Wright brothers and their uncommon sense revolutionized the entire world. They revolutionized war. They revolutionized travel. They revolutionized photography. Getting a shot from the air is by far more interesting than shooting things from the ground. I mean, we got 1,000 fucking drones out there that are shooting shots all the time. And people, you know, you can even see a guy standing there holding his remote, shooting himself. And it's a more interesting thing. It almost looks like he had a helicopter camera crew. It makes for a better show. I mean, if I was doing this outside, I would totally want to have a drone so I could shoot stuff from above and get the cool angles, the camera panning around me, all that. It just makes everything more interesting. Dreamers are not limited by common sense. Dreamers often come up with stupid ideas. You know, once my mom came up with the thought that we were having trouble drilling a hole through our wall to get the satellite cable through. And Mom says, well, why don't you just shoot a hole through it with a gun? And I looked at her like she was retarded. But the truth is, a second later, it clicked, and I said, we don't have any neighbors. We live way out in the country at that point. I said, you know what? That will give us a pilot hole. Yeah, we loaded up the 22, shot a hole through the wall, drilled it out with a drill, and we were watching cable that evening, or satellite, Express View, Bell, whatever it was. Common sense stifles dreams, and it kills curiosity. People who are trying to tell you that you have no common sense just want you to do everything the way it was. Status quo. And that's fine, but common sense tells you that you can play other people's music and make a decent living at it. You don't need to write your own songs. That's a lot of extra effort. And why go to all that when you can just pick up tabs, learn how to write some or play someone else's music, and carry forward playing music? You don't need to trouble yourself with the creative effort. Just play. But if everybody would have had that attitude, we'd never even have music in the first place. Somebody had to have that rhythm and to want to share that. And somebody else wanted to formalize it and put it down. And then, you know, then we end up with Beethoven, who's at a very young age. He didn't care about common sense. It's hard to believe that somebody who's, or Wolfgang Mozart, somebody who is that young is just writing symphonies and writing their own music, you know, with their natural talents. And it's wonderful that they did, because they made it possible for the people who didn't dream as deeply and didn't reach as high to still enjoy music and to play it, even if they didn't want to write it. There's a place for everybody. There's an old saying on the farm, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And that's a good saying, you know, if you're in the middle of harvest and something is partly broke, but you think you might be able to, or maybe it was just fixed improperly. I remember my youth leader telling us about, he's noticed something was broken or had poorly fixed on a piece of equipment that he was driving, and he went to stop and fix it. And his dad pulled over and said, what are you doing? He said, well, I was just going to replace this bolt. So there's a kind of a pin and it's floppy there. And his dad said, if it's not broke, don't fix it. We have work to do. We can't afford to stop for half an hour to fix something that's still working. And that's great. It's a good idea. And as far as I know, that piece didn't break until after harvest. He was able to, and it didn't even break then. After the harvest, he was able to get out there and fix it correctly and make it so it's better for next year. But he got through that harvest without having to stop. And there's value in that for sure. On the other hand, you can't feed a city with hand tools. And if no one would have ever, like John Deere building the sod buster plow, most people in the Midwest wouldn't even live there if they still had to do all their gardening and all of their farming by hand. You wouldn't have great big cities. Everyone would still be living on a little farmstead, turning up the soil with a shovel or with a hoe. In World War I, there was a propaganda picture, and it showed 3 French women pulling a plow and another one running the plow behind them because the horses were all being used to move artillery. And they said, look what these women are doing for the effort. What are you doing? And it was very, very judgmental and somewhat condemning, but it showed what the alternative was. The alternative is you can step into the trace yourself and pull that plow through the dirt. And I don't know anybody who wants to do that. I mean, personally, I cut my grass around my house with a scythe. People think I'm crazy. At the same time, I end up with a bunch of straw and hay for my rabbits, and I'm able to feed them more effectively than I would if I was running a gas-powered lawnmower around. It's also great for my back, and it keeps me strong. Trying something new and hoping it works is not common sense. Common sense is to do the thing that always worked before. Why would you do that? Why would you try something new? Well, sometimes those new thoughts turn into incredible innovations. Like I was saying with McDonald's, it was probably $1 billion, even $1 trillion idea over the intervening years. And I'm not saying, oh, look at how awesome I was for coming up with that. I just happened to notice it before they did. Another thing I came up with at McDonald's was the 10-piece nuggets. If you can have 2 10-piece nuggets, makes a 20-piece. You do away with the 9-piece, and you've done away with 2 items from your inventory. The 9-piece and the 20-piece box. Now that doesn't seem like a lot, and it doesn't seem all that impressive. But when you, once again, scale it over every McDonald's in the world, suddenly you've saved millions of dollars. And over the years, it turns into tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars going back into the business, into the shareholders, into the pockets of the people who own the McDonald's. Because that's not common sense. It's not common sense to spend the money necessary to get a franchise. That's uncommon sense. That's why so few people own franchises compared to the people who are working in those jobs. Common sense says go get a job, you'll make some money. Uncommon sense says work for yourself. You're going to do better. Common sense is not useless, and every innovation can benefit from it. Yeah, discarding that innovation because it defies what everyone knows is foolish. We don't need to just stick with what we know. We don't need to stick with what worked last year. If you can get yourself ahead by doing what the status quo was, that gives you time to dream. That gives you time to move ahead. Every brilliant dream needs somebody with common sense to keep it grounded. Just like a kite won't fly unless it has a string. I mean, it might blow across the yard and end up hanging in a tree, but it won't ever fly to the full extent that it can without a grounding line. That's the same as common sense. But you can't suppress a dreamer by saying, well, just use your common sense. Some people just don't have it. Not to be judgmental, some people just only have uncommon sense. And if we can help support them and lift them up, then I don't think that we really need to worry about the future. People have different ideas. People want to have different forms of government. And as long as you're not having to lock people up and force them into your way, if your idea is good enough, people will follow it. You don't have to re-educate somebody or imprison them if the method that you have of doing something is better. All you have to do is show it to them in compassion and love, and you're going to see that they're going to jump on board. You know, politically, I'm a centrist. It means I see the strengths and weaknesses of the left. I see the strengths and weaknesses of the right. Both sides hate me. The right calls me a communist. The left calls me a fascist. I just wish that they could put aside their differences and get together on the things that are important and bring both of those strengths to the middle so that we can actually get ahead. And I think that's uncommon good sense. You would think that it should be common sense, that different people can bring their strengths together and help each other out. But it doesn't seem to be the case anymore. So maybe common sense isn't that common anymore. I'm not exactly sure how much time I have left on this video. My phone will only shoot 34 minutes at a time. And I'm going to probably just shut her down here. I love the common sense talk, and I probably could have gone way longer on it, but I'm trying to keep these videos to about half an hour. As we go through their life, try to, if somebody says something that's far out there, don't just shut them down with, some people have no common sense. Listen to them. Try to figure out what exactly they're saying, because they might be telling you about the next iPhone. They might be telling you about the next Tesla. I know when I saw the first EV1 commercials, I thought that's never going to take off. And it didn't. It was a stifled technology, and it got shut down. But here we are, 25 years later, 26 years later, and everybody wants a Tesla. It's the new greatest thing. It's the greatest thing since sliced bread. Sliced bread, having a machine designed to slice bread, that's uncommon sense. And yet no one wants to be without it anymore. People take sliced bread for granted. I could probably rabbit trail here for a long more time. But everybody, I want you all to have... if you like my video, please like, share, and subscribe. I'm not on Facebook for spiritual reasons. And I feel led to not be there. It felt like I was selling my soul for memes and Messenger, really. It wasn't a good enough trade. So just remember, have an awkwardly awesome day. God loves you, and so do I.